Shalom, friends. Welcome back to Judaism Unplugged. I'm Rabbi Steve Wiseman from Temple Solel in Bowie, Maryland. And in this video, we continue our look at Jewish history in a video entitled Alexander, but not Hamilton. The focus of this video is the entry into the Middle East of Greek culture and civilization with the arrival of the great conqueror, Alexander the Great, and the impact that this has on the Jewish community of Judea in and around Jerusalem. It's a significant impact, even if it does not actually involve wars that involved the Jewish people. And it's one that to a certain degree enters the Jewish people into the world of modernity, in the sense of now having to learn to survive as a minority culture and religion within a larger society. To understand this fully, we need to pick up quickly from where we left off. The middle of the 5th century BCE, the return to reestablish a second temple, a second Commonwealth period in Jewish history in Jerusalem around an entity now called Judea, was made possible by the conquest of the Babylonians by Cyrus of Persia, and over the course of the leadership of Cyrus and his son Darius, his son Xerxes and his son Artaxerxes, Jewish leadership and other Jewish prisoners eventually, most of them returned to Jerusalem, reestablished and restored a Jewish entity, rebuilt a far smaller but still central temple, walls around the city of Jerusalem, and established a document known as Torah Moshe, probably very similar, if not exactly the same as what we now call Torah today, not only as the centerpiece of the religious practice led by the priesthood, but also the centerpiece as a constitution that was administered by the governor appointed by Persia. By the time Alexander gets to the Middle East in about 333 BCE, very little has changed over that 110, 120 year period from when we saw Ezra and Nehemiah establishing Torah Moshe as a centerpiece of what was being rebuilt. The one thing that appears to have changed, though, is that the two distinct entities of the priest and the governor seem to have rolled into one. And it's not completely clear, but it seems somewhat probable that under the Persians and their foreign policy of allowing everybody else's prisoners to go back and restore their homelands and live freely in loyalty for the freedom that they've been given, that it's entirely possible that this governor and priestly amalgamation into a single person came over this 100-year period as a result of the Persians not needing or caring to appoint governors. And so the reestablished priesthood, which was somewhat more dynastic and hereditary, got combined with the governorship so there would be a continuity. And it's not until there's a change in the outside leadership with the conquest of the Persians by the Greeks and the establishment of Alexander and Greek culture and society over the Middle East and over Judea and Jerusalem, that there's going to be a need or even an opportunity for that to change. As we know from our studies in Western civilization, shortly after conquering as far as India, Alexander dies young and unmarried with no heir. And having conquered basically the entire Mediterranean basin and as far east as portions of what is today India, the entirety of the known world is then divided up between Alexander's three prime generals, each of whom is more or less given a continent. So Seleucus, one of his generals, is put in charge of basically Asia. Ptolemy, another of his generals, is basically put in charge of the holdings in North Africa, including Egypt. And the third general is given basic control over the holdings in Europe. For the part of the story that affects Jews and Jewish history, we're looking at the dynasties formed by Seleucus and his descendants in Asia and Ptolemy and his descendants in Africa. To give you perspective, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic line in Egypt would be Cleopatra. Virtually all of the other rulers of the Ptolemaic line took the name Ptolemy, according to the Egyptian king and pharaonic lists. So starting with Alexander's death, you now have Judea and Jerusalem sitting on that land bridge that connects Asia and Africa, sort of on the frontier between the two. And if you think about what the known world of the Mediterranean basin, Alexander's kingdom now divided, would have looked like in the hands of the three generals, they were still generals by training. They kept armies, even though there didn't appear to be anybody on the outside that was going to threaten them. To keep an army fresh, you have to keep them in training. So every now and then there would be war games or little blow-ups that got out of hand in a hurry as an excuse for the armies to practice and stay sharp. And if you look at the history of the region, Judea and Jerusalem, sitting on that boundary between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, was an area that actually went back and forth a couple of times over the course of about 150 or so years, as the Seleucids and the Ptolemies skirmished with each other, sometimes pushing the boundaries out, sometimes retrenching in the other direction. The fighting didn't involve the Jews in Judea directly, but it did impact the stability of their community. With the governor now being appointed again by the foreign ruler, if the foreign ruler changed from Seleucid to Ptolemy or Ptolemy to Seleucid, then that affected the internal alliances and power structure within Judea and Jerusalem as well. The presence of Greek culture also created a second separate line of division within the Jewish community. You continue to have Jews who were very comfortable and very desirous to live the same Jewish lifestyle as their fathers and grandfathers before them, and were not open or interested in any of the novelties of Greek culture that were now accessible in the region. But there were also Jews who were very interested in Hellenistic ways. Very interested in potentially seeing Jerusalem be given the status of polis within the Greek world, which would allow its citizens to be seen as citizens of Greece, would open up things like Greek education, Greek culture to a wider Jewish audience. And so there was a cultural schism, a religious cultural schism between the traditionalists and the Hellenists that was developing during the same period as well. Not exactly along the same lines as the political distinction between the pro-Ptolemies and the pro-Seleucids. Ultimately, that comes to a head in the historic events that are the backdrop that leads to the celebration of Hanukkah, of which we'll talk in our next video. But none of that happens without the arrival in 333 BCE of Alexander the Great into the Middle East and the division of his conquests in the way that they were between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, at least as far as affects Jerusalem. It's a significantly formative period. Not a lot of historical detail in the period itself, but it lays the origins for so much of what follows. Once again, if you have any questions about the material in this video, I invite you to reach out by email. You can find the email address on the Temple Solel website, templesolelmd.org. And until our next video, I say shalom, friends, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.